Hola amigos, welcome to Latina Living History. I am Katie. This is my channel, and I am so honored to be hosting the What Your BIPOC Costumer Friends Want You to Know panel for Costume Symposium 2021. I am going to let my fabulous panelists introduce themselves, and we're going to talk about different aspects of the costuming community, the overlap with living history, inclusion in all of those spaces, and what that means to us. So I'm going to start with Anneliese. Go ahead and intro.
Hi, I'm Anneliese. I actually get to do this for a day job. I am working at a large living history museum in Western New York. And in my spare time, I create and fit costumes.
Awesome. All right, Bianca, take it away.
I'm Bianca. I do historical costuming, cosplay, and I'm actually starting fashion school in the fall. So if you ever think you're too old for things, just know, embrace it, live your life how you want to. So I'm probably going to expand my fiber art related interests. And I'm very active in the Jane Austen and Regency spaces. So you might know me from there as Bookhoarding or formerly Drunk Austen.
Awesome. All right, Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela. My handle on Instagram is DemiPINTE, and I run DemiPINTE Creations. I'm from Montreal, Canada, but I come by way of many places. I was actually born in the Philippines, and I was raised in Vancouver. And I do a lot of history bounding, a lot of history bounding related sewing, and I have been getting in touch with my Philippine roots, which I seem to have neglected while I was growing up. And one of the ways that I'm doing that is through the historical costuming of the Philippines and the creative arts and traditions that we have in the island.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Kristen?
I should unmute myself if I want to talk. I'm Kristen. I'm a teacher. I've been teaching high school for the past decade. And I've been a part of the costuming community for that long. I'm more interested in beadwork and sort of, smaller accessory type things, but I will sew if forced. My family is Mexican, and that's something that I've thought about in terms of costuming as well.
Awesome. And Miah.
Hi, my name is Miah. I am currently living in Jacksonville, Seminole County. But I'm originally from Ohio, home of the Shawnee, and I am half Shawnee. And my costuming background is mostly in very, very, very small theaters. So community theaters and very small, low-budget school theaters. That's mostly where I've done my stuff.
Awesome. And I actually don't know if all you guys know this about me. I am half Mexican. My background was originally theatrical costume, and then I worked at a historic site for a couple of summers when I was in college, and that's kind of what got me into making my own garments for historical interpretation. And so that's kind of where I've come from. And then over the years, I've done, some people call it reenacting. I prefer living history. Reenacting tends to have connotations of like recreating battles and stuff like that, and I'm more interested in women, because I am a female presenting person, and material culture, and like the way that people have always been people, and they've always wanted nice things and to wear nice clothes and that sort of thing. So that's how I got into costuming. And then I started a YouTube channel because COVID quarantine, what else are we gonna do? We don't have events. So that's where I'm coming from. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, and I say tonight, we're filming this in the evening in the US. We're going to talk about things like DEI and inclusion, inclusivity, that sort of thing. And so did we want to take a minute to kind of talk about what that actually means? DEI, Kristen, I believe you actually have gotten a certificate in DEI. So do you want to take a second and explain to us what that means and what like the going definition is in the field?
Right. So again, my perspective is from education. So if you ever hear me use words that are just teacher based, I'm sorry, that's where that's kind of my lens. So the way it's been sort of presented to me is diversity is the idea that we're bringing different people together. people from diverse backgrounds. So we're bringing people to the table. Equity is making the table and having everybody seated there and recognized there. And inclusion is everybody working together. So you need to have diversity to, first of all, bring people into the picture. Equity is creating the table so everybody can sit, so making decisions so everybody's comfortable and safe in that space. And then inclusion is actually bringing together and having that work happen. This is the most simple way I've heard it described, and it's worked well for me. So I hope I did it right.
That's really good and really helpful. And I think various circles in the Venn diagram of costuming, living history, museums, education have varying levels of each one of those. So some places are still working on diversity. They don't have anyone that's not from an elite Ivy League background at the table with a voice making decisions. I see that a lot in museum spaces. There's a lot of barriers to getting into management type stuff in a museum space. There's degrees that you need to have and connections that you need to make, and it's often chronically underfunded and underpaid. And some places they're making strides in diversity. I know costuming, particularly in the online spaces, since that's mostly what we've been confined to in the last year and a half, has been really talking about inclusion, but I think in a more realistic sense in some places is still working on diversity and equity. Obviously the goal is to be able to have everyone working together, but if there's not a space at the table, we're not there yet.
Katie, in that element too, they don't, just like you said, they don't all happen all at the same time. Sometimes there are some very well-intentioned white people who kind of jump in and say, hey, we're going to create this safe space, but they don't have people of color involved in the process, so they don't know what safety looks like, and they don't understand anything beyond maybe what we would probably recognize as tokenism in that process.
Yes. Miah and Angela and I are currently co-modding a group that just ran into the idea of a safe space. Has to be safe for everyone in it, or it's not a safe space. And safety for people who do not face barriers of things like racism and colorism looks very different than the world for people who do. And a lot of people mistake comfort for safety. I know I've been involved in a lot of conversations where people are saying, white people are saying, I don't feel like this is a safe space anymore because I can't say what I think. And that's not the same as not being safe.
No, it's
and I realize I'm preaching to the choir here, but some people have never even thought of that concept. So it bears saying. And it does kind of lead into the first thing that I wanted to talk about, which is what does creating an inclusive community look like to you in your field? Like, what would that world be like if we could get so we've got online costuming, we've got Jane Austen spaces, we've got living history, and it's going to look different for all of them. So let's talk about online, because that's where we're starting. We're all here online. And that's a huge way that people connect even within living history and museums. So what does that even look like? What does an actual inclusive community look like?
Not so white.
and like purposely not so white.
Yeah.
Like there's a difference between like we happen to have POC people and like we did a good job and actually intentionally, or beyond POC obviously, but like specifically because we're talking about this, like really making space to protect them and to have guidelines I'm always like, if your group guidelines don't specifically say you're protecting people of color, then I do not trust it. Point blank.
Yeah. Yeah. Those of us who do not face racism, like, you know, being threatened with a firearm on the street, need to go out of our way to keep RBS out of the paths of people who do face that brutal day-to-day reality. And right now I see a lot of brown people who may call themselves white passing, people who are not particularly Black people, making a lot of effort toward that. And I would like to see a lot of actually white people making that effort, which is going to take a level of self-awareness that I don't think society has called for before now. Anneliese, I think I cut you off.
No, I was just thinking that, you know, inclusion to me goes beyond just the representation of people of color. You know, it really is that full integration, that their stories, their material culture, that's all represented.
Yeah. I was also going to say, because like my journey in costuming and researching my own culture's material culture, I guess, like it's not just, for me, it's not just, oh, we have more BIPOC people moving in these spaces and being present in these spaces, wearing the clothes of Western people, wearing the clothes of colonizers. It's us in our culture's costumes, in our culture's like traditional dress, and that being not just there, but also recognized as a valid part of costuming.
Yeah.
As like not an experiment, but like as a valid part of what costuming is and what global costuming should be.
Yeah, for sure. I think Kristen
and uplifting.
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, like uplifting that, like I think for me, like if people are down to spend time looking at why hairpins were important in a certain era, then can they please also spend time understanding why it's important that we talk about representation in film and media too, which are tied. Because for me, the Bridgerton discussion was a big thing, because I'm like, some of y'all are being blatantly racist in how you're talking about this show. There are valid critiques of the show, but some of y'all are just so heels dug in on being upset that Black people exist, because that's what it was. But we've got substantial proof that Black people did exist very much in Regency London, Tudor London, you know, like starting there too, like throughout history they've been there. And for people to be like, well, I know these facts, I blah 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 about hairpins and bonnets, and I'm like, but do you care about the people here? Because like the people in this community are saying it's important for them to see themselves in this history finally. And you would rather talk about a hairpin? You'd rather talk about a bonnet? I think you're missing the point.
Yeah, I have seen in film and TV discussions, in living history spaces across the board, historical accuracy used as a shield for this is why you don't belong.
Which is like the most like adjacent to whitewashing thing you could do to gatekeep people.
Yeah, it is gatekeeping. And it happens all the time. Every single event, every single space. And I think a big step in creating inclusive communities is that you gotta believe us. You got to believe that we're experiencing what we say we're experiencing.
And you have to decenter like white comfort in those conversations. Because I think that's the thing. Like, even when I've been involved or seen people bring up, hey, like, so I'm experiencing racism, or I'm speaking up for my friend who they left because of this. And this is like across the board in multiple spaces I'm in. So it's not literally, this is not a call out or subtweet to any one specific person. This is a subtweet to a lot of people.
Yeah, like it's so common that I don't know who you're talking about.
Because it could be so many things.
Yeah.
And like I've been in those conversations, or I've seen them go down, where it's literally been contextualized. Well, the white people don't think it's racist, so it's it's actually making them uncomfortable. So like, actually you should stop. And it's like, wait, what is happening here? And I've seen this happen so much. So it's like, if someone's going to the effort of talking to you and saying, hey, I've experienced something that's racist or any other thing that makes them othered and like not feel included or safe there, and it makes you uncomfortable, you need to like decenter that. You need to be like, wait, no, it's not about me and my comfort. I need to understand what is actually happening here, because clearly there's a problem. And I'm also willing to bet you, if there's one person that's finally talking about something, there's probably tons of other people who experience it too, and you don't want to have an anthill of other stuff. You don't want to push that aside and have other people experience harm when something goes down. And I think that like decentering people's own comfort too on platforms, being like, hey, you might lose some followers because you're going to say that you're anti-racist in feed, not just in your story one time, not just in like a passing thing one time, a comment that you said, no, of course I'm not racist. If you are not ready to put out in the open consistently how you want to support marginalized communities, especially people of color, in spaces that you know are already having harm done to them, then that's fleeting. That tells me that you aren't actually invested in this. You're too afraid. If you're too afraid to lose followers or like members or whatever, then like you aren't actively like understanding the actual harm that can be done and like the actual like stakes. Because if your stakes are still rooted in your own benefits, that's also low-key like white supremacy thinking, y'all.
Yeah. And
sorry, I want to jump in. It's really interesting when we're having this discussion. I just spoke at a professional development about DEI, and one of the things that I centered around is language. And I think before we can, I don't want to say before, but concurrently at the same time, having a discussion about what these terms actually mean, because unfortunately a lot of these words have turned into political hotspot buzzwords. Like I just had a discussion with my volunteer group about the word safe spaces, and that gets thrown around a lot, like liberal snowflake, like there's all these different things that get thrown around, and in reality, you know what we're trying to say, or like microaggression, or you know, bias or stereotyping. I think a lot of people, you know, sort of throw those words together and don't fully understand or comprehend the gravity behind what that means, because they're sitting from a point of privilege. Even the word privilege itself, when they look at that, I've had numerous people jump in and say, well, I was born, you know, I worked on my own family members. I was born downriver Detroit, and, you know, my parents didn't have a lot of money. I'm like, well, being Black wasn't the reason that affected you at all. So admit that, and then we can start getting some work done, you know. So I almost feel like we need a vocabulary list, and before anybody can do any costuming event whatsoever, you need to like pass a quiz. And this is the teacher. You need to pass a pop quiz. Do you know what bias is? Do you know what stereotype is? Because then we can start to have the words in our toolkit to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And like that's the thing though that's frustrating. For me, it's that we are in a community of people who, sorry, I'm like hearing reverb of myself. Sorry. What's frustrating for me is that we're in a community that really focuses on research. And for people not to research these terms, I get it. Like, I totally get, like, I'm like, I don't go down a wormhole about specific costuming sub things, but like, this is literally your community members. This isn't asking you to suddenly become a medievalist overnight. That's no shade to medievalists. Like, that's just saying that's a lot of work. Yeah. And I respect that work. I'm just saying no one's asking you to do that work. Literally, we're just saying, I need you to just do the bare minimum to care about the other people in your community and protect them.
One thing that is just like my own nitpicky pet peeve with online spaces and costuming is that, you know, I'm very, very white passing, you know, and when I first step in, usually people do think that I'm white. And then there's always this switch that I get to watch happen, where now all of a sudden, anytime they have any kind of a question about any native history from like the North Pole to Brazil, they assume that I know the answer to any of their questions, regardless of how niche or how completely disconnected from like my family in the Ohio Valley it is. And it's like, I'm so sorry. And I've seen people do this to other people too, where they've assumed like, oh, well, you know, you're African American, so you know everything about like Nigerian waist beads, right? You can help me with this project, or oh, you're Asian, so, and it's like, no, that's, you know, that's not necessarily their niche just because, you know?
Yeah.
But I'm gonna step off that soapbox now.
I mean, no, I definitely agree with that too, and it definitely does. Like it resonates with me because I'm a Filipina, but I grew up in Canada, and we immigrated when I was 2 years old. I don't have my language, so but it's such a big thing for Filipinos to have their language, and a lot of us who have immigrated and who have moved away and into Western society, like the ones who speak it really do cling to it. But I didn't have that when I was growing up. My first language is English. My second language is French. My third language is German. I have no Tagalog whatsoever. But people will come to me and be like, "Oh, you're Filipino. What does this mean?" I'm like, I can't give that to you. I don't even understand it myself. And even with our history, there's a lot about our history that you know, on the one hand, my own personal family history, I know very well because it's very well documented. But I don't know other histories because I wasn't taught it. It wasn't part of my education growing up. But also, it's really hard to find those materials and those resources because we were colonized by Spain and then by America, who had their own versions of Philippine history that they wanted to tell. And so it is really something that, like, on the one hand, reclaiming it for myself is one thing, but also educating and doing that work, it's not something that I'm capable of doing as much as I would want to. And I'm there to help in what ways I can, but I don't think any one person from any ethnicity or any other you know, any other race or any other, however you want to call it, however you want to label it, any one person of that group cannot give you the full picture of what that group is and what that history looks like.
Yeah, and for a lot of our ancestors, it was assimilate or die.
Yeah.
So asking us that is tapping into a place of trauma. That was not the case for my family. My dad was adopted, and we don't know anything about his family because the records were destroyed when the Zapatistas burned the town hall in his hometown. And so, like, as I've attempted to kind of just connect with that part of my heritage, I've almost had to go through a grieving process because I will never have access to that. I will never know for sure a lot of the family background. And like he has relatives that I've met, but I didn't speak Spanish at the time I was a child. And so I know nothing except their names. And that's not a part of his life that he was interested in, he being my dad. That's not a part of his life that he's interested in learning more about. And so I am on my own learning about Mexico. I know the state that he's from, but I don't know anything about my family background, which is in stark contrast to my mom's side of the family. She's white and my grandpa was a genealogist. He had us traced back to Norway in the 1500s. So like, I got all of that, but that's not the part that I need right now. And there's a grief that goes with that.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's something that we get to talk about a lot.
Yeah.
I feel that, and like it's really interesting listening to y'all talking about those layers because I'm like, yeah, like my dad's from El Salvador. Literally, like he ran away from a war that destroyed his whole history. And it's really hard because like in these conversations, we're talking about these colonial powers that are still in some ways colonial powers and still impacting our histories. And so if we are a community that's really tied to really understanding history, understanding the impacts of the people in your community too, when you're coming to the table with us, we're going to have a different perspective on these things. If you're going to bring up wanting to do Spanish, like colonial cosplay or like costuming, I'm going to have a weird reaction to that because it's going to be hard for me because I know nothing about, you know, what is left of my family because of that. And like, those are those things that you should think really deeply about with any space that you're going into where you're talking about a colonizing force.
People don't like the word colonizer.
No.
I mean,
No, and
that's a red flag for me. I have a lot of red flags of things that people are not okay with, and if being called a colonizer is one of them, well,
yeah. I am very happy to be an ungrateful colonial.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So, for those of you who don't know, my husband is British, and so he likes to send me funny memes for 4th of July. And one year it was Happy Treason Day, Ungrateful Colonials, and I was like, damn right.
Yep.
This year it was the British flag, and it was like, we lost a war too. Why? And you know, weren't part of the U.S. Why don't they fly me?
So, Katie, you were talking a little bit about like sort of your grief with, you know, discovering your family. And I think for a lot of us, especially when our families immigrated here, my grandparents immigrated here when they were young, and they still have a presence here. They came in through Detroit, which is, you know, a huge, I've been doing a lot of family history. And it's really interesting when you start reading a book and you ask your grandfather, like, hey, Buffy, what is this? And he's like, oh, that's your great-great-uncle Simone. Got a story about that. And I'm like, what? So I'm actually finally able to start digging in. But I will say personally, because I am a white Mexican, and because my last name is White, that was very purposeful on part of my mother. And she's even told me that, she's like, Kristen, I wanted you to have the best life possible, and Kristen Morozek will have a better life than someone named Isabella. I'm giving you my cousin's name. You know, like, there is a very particular thing, and I've missed that my entire life. I'm like, I'm just Kristen. And, you know, you kind of got to come to terms with your name, but also the purpose behind it, because there's these beautiful names in my family, Maristela, just beautiful names, and I missed that. There's like, I missed that in a bid to protect me. So I feel like I kind of carried that weight from my mother throughout, where she's like, I gave you a name, I raised you white, I didn't even teach you Spanish, so you don't have an accent, so you can go be safe. And I understand that. I will never fault her for that. She wanted me safe. And I never bring that, my heritage, to costuming, because I've been able to hide it and keep it safe for so long that why would I tell people I'm Mexican if I don't have to? Because it's not a comfortable space for me to do that.
No, 100%. Not identifying as white is very, very new to me, because my great-grandmother Boggs, she purposefully, you know, she destroyed census records, she destroyed yearbooks, she destroyed every trace that could directly tie us to the Shawnee tribe, because, you know, I mean, they're excavating the schools. We all know why she did it. And so, like, my dad would sit me down and he would talk to me, and he'd give me this whole talk about, you know, God really blessed you, you know, a very heavy talk to have with a 10-year-old. You're very pale, you're beautiful, you have a white sounding name, you couldn't speak your language if you wanted to, no one could ever prove that you were anything other than white. And like, you should be grateful for that. And it's like, within the last maybe 2 years, I've gotten to a point where I'm really ungrateful. And, you know, I'm really enjoying being ungrateful. But at the same time, there's a weird guilt that comes with it. And I hope I'm not the only one here, but like, I've started learning my language, you know, and through the whole process, it's like, if my grandma were alive right now, she would probably like crawl her way out of the grave just to slap me across the face, you know?
Yeah. It's that's a lot, you guys. That's a lot. So when I say that we're coming from a place of trauma and grief, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And I think I react in a different way than most because, while I'm ethnically Chinese, I'm very interested in American culture. And I pursue American culture, American material culture, rather than the culture of my ethnicity and heritage.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Oh,
That is,
definitely not.
We're like, it's really great that we live now when that's a choice that we can make. And like I have very much pursued learning about the material culture of like where I live in Michigan. So like the historic site that I worked at had French and British and Native and Métis. And so, you know, that was my introduction to living history and costuming. And so like none of it was specifically tied to my heritage, but that's fine. Not fine is the visitors that would ask me what tribe I'm from because I look different. You know, so there's pitfalls, but that's a choice that we get to make. And the problem is when someone tells you that's not the right choice. Like if any of us were to be like, you're betraying, you know, other brown people because of this, that's a problem. Also a problem the other way. If people are like, no, in order to be a part of this space, you have to do European fashion.
Yeah. And I think the big problem is that within the spaces I am specifically, there's often well, people of your, you know, background certainly wouldn't have been here, and then that lends itself to, well, you shouldn't be here either. It's because I choose to represent this material culture. Why are you questioning this? I mean, I'm as much American as anybody else, so I have a right to the same history that anyone else here is claiming to have a right to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I was going to say as well that, like, I think one thing that I feel is important to point out is that none of us are shitting on, pardon my language, but none of us are shitting on white material culture. None of us are shitting on white history, in the sense that, like, you know, for a lot of us here, those like very European, like British centric media is what got us to where we are now. It's what got us into learning about costuming, which led us into learning about history, which led us to a place where we were like, wait, what about me? What about my people? What about my history? And that is where we all started from there. I think it's really important to say that, like, we're not saying that it's not important. We're not saying that it didn't have an impact, but I think for me personally, it's like some acknowledgement about the total impact of it, or what that entire impact looked like on people like me, is what's needed. And that what was erased or taken away from my homeland needs to be recognized, just as much as, you know, the wonderfully aesthetic things about Victorian England, for example. Like, it's just, you know, we're not saying it doesn't have a place. It does, but we have a place too. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and like, so my gateway drug was the 1995 Sense and Sensibility with Emma Thompson and Kate Winslet. Kate Winslet, yes. And so like that time period, if I'm talking about Mexico, the Spanish were already there. There were French people there, you know, so fashion-wise, you had all that carryover, right? And so I've been having a great time looking into 1820s Mexico because of my Josefina American Girl project, right? And so it's not, I mean, it's technically not, you know, US American, it's North America, right? And so there's a lot of similarities, but there's also differences. And so that has been, you know, it's been really interesting to take something that I'm already familiar with from doing, you know, War of 1812. We had the bicentennial in 2012, and then kind of more events in the Midwest for that time period. So I already was like comfortable in that era. And then to be like, hey, there's more, has been really rewarding. And so like, I don't know, like, I don't feel comfortable trying to research an indigenous culture and recreate their dress from that area because I don't know if that's what I am. That's, I feel like I can't confirm whether or not I am part of a Mayan culture. So that is just not, it's not for me. And that's okay. It deserves dignity and preservation and recognition, but not for me to wear. And that's all right. But the European influence was already there and very strong, and so it's been really interesting to see the differences between what I know from up here in the upper Midwest with the fur trade and the War of 1812 versus in Mexico in 1810 you had the Grito de Dolores, and basically like Mexico being like we don't want to be Spanish anymore.
Yeah.
Get out. So there's a whole nother part of history that I never knew about, and I have a hard time envisioning stuff a lot of times when I just read about history. So to have a time period that I'm familiar with, like the aesthetic and what to picture, helps me to really kind of get into the history and be like, I can picture what that would have been like, and it's been really rewarding. So. You know, just because it's here and it's colonizer fashion doesn't mean it's not a window into something that's important to us.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was like I like a lot of people, you know, very enamored with the Victorian aesthetic of things, you know, and just because that is what I'm drawn to when I'm looking for something new to watch or looking for something new to read. Like it's that, and a lot of that does have to do with like the steampunk part of it, you know, which is a whole other discussion. But like for me, a big turning point in realizing that like Filipiniana, which is like the Philippine historical fashion, the turning point or like the light bulb moment for me realizing that this was something that I could look into, that I could give myself permission to look into, not just because it was mine, but because like I just never realized that there was a way to do it. It was last summer, and Raven Ong did a talk with, I can't remember which cultural group it was, but there was this, I came across it very randomly, and Raven Ong, who is a Filipino designer living in New England, and working in costuming and theater, I believe, and also in designing fashion. He did this whole talk about Filipiniana, and I was mesmerized because it was the first time that I actually really heard somebody from my culture talking about our clothing, talking about what it meant to us, what influenced it. And at my mom's house, there are these beautiful, beautiful photos of essentially my ancestors, these strong, wonderful, beautiful Philippine women. And I've just never understood their clothes. I've never understood, like, you know, they have these gigantic, beautiful sleeves and these patterns and these materials, these fibers. Like, I had no idea what those were, and I had no idea how to relate to them. And realizing that I could look at a Victorian fashion plate and understand exactly what was going on there. And I'm not white, but then I could look at like a photo of my own great grandmother and not understand what it is, like what is going on here. It was such a revelation for me, and such an experience of being like, wait, like there's something here that I'm missing. There's something here I want to learn about. And after reading up on it, the next time that I was over at my mom's house, I was just standing in front of this tiny little photo, just obsessing over these details over it, and feeling for the first time that like, oh, I actually am connected to this person. Like she's not just this random person hanging on my mom's wall. Like, she's mine. I'm hers. It was very powerful for me.
That's really cool. That's really cool. I'm so glad you got to have that experience. That is really amazing. And I haven't had that so powerfully with anything in my own family. But so for those of you who don't know, I own a horse and I ride side saddle. And that is a part of the interpretation I sometimes do at historic sites, is I bring us a display of antique side saddles and the horse, and we demonstrate. And so the historic site that Anneliese works at gave me an opportunity to do that a few years ago, in the before times. And I did it, and it was great, and it was wonderful and awesome and really cool. And then sometime in the interim, I started researching Latin American history and fashion and art. And most of the material about riding side saddle is British centric. It's an art that is very much alive and well in England. They do, fox hunts and drag hunts and shows and all that sort of stuff. And there's some in the US, but not as much. And so it's just always kind of felt like I'm adjacent to it. Like I kind of do my own thing, and I don't do anything fancy. I'm not really a part of it, but I do it. And I found a painting of a Victorian woman from the Caribbean riding side saddle, and I went, she looks like me. There's somebody that looks like me doing the thing that I do in history. It's real. It existed. I belong. And that was really powerful. Just a really special moment. And so it was European fashion, and it was something that you see a lot in the US and England, and you see the Downton Abbey effect. That was where it really got popularized in modern media. But she looked like me, and it was real. Someone did that. Someone painted that woman. She was real, and that was really cool.
I think the big takeaways, then I'd say, to kind of bring it back to what y'all should do, what y'all should know if you're watching this, you want to know how to do shit, is respect our space, in that we're gonna have our own baggage with our own identities and our own relationships with the things that we're interested in. So respect that. If someone's inviting you to have a conversation with them about their experience with that, that's different. But there's a lot of deep history and a lot of layers of it. And the bottom line is, the thing that you can do is, the actionable thing is making these spaces safe for us to just be in right now. Because you're hearing a lot of things here. We're talking about having our histories exist, having our histories be elevated in these academic talks, having our histories be respected in these spaces. And I think that the first step toward doing that is respecting there's going to be baggage for us. What's the thing that you can do? Because we're not asking you to be the therapist for us. You don't have to do that. We're just asking for the minimum.
I pay a therapist for that.
Yeah, that's someone else's job. We're just asking for hey, and we're not asking for I don't think we're really asking for much that's radical right now. We're just saying the minimum is just making sure that this is a cool space for us. So clearly we're coming in here with a lot of things that are not going to make us feel safe to begin with, and you need to account for that in the spaces you're trying to build or maintain or even be a part of. Even people who are not in leadership positions, there's still a ton you could do to ask for things, to help make change, to make sure that your friends are okay in these spaces. And that's really the to-do list. It is no matter what your role is, if you're a white person in these communities, you can do a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's something really, again, really important to point out, is that a lot those of us who are BIPOC, those of us who are not white, we can clamor and we can yell all we want, but unfortunately, a reality for us is that until a white person actually says what we've been saying all along, nobody wants to listen. And nobody starts listening until a white person has said something about it. And we've seen that before. We've seen that recently. And it's not something that oh, no, Angela, that hasn't happened anytime lately. It does. It happens almost every day. And we can lead by example, but if you are a non-BIPOC person watching this, your BIPOC friends will lead you, and they will set an example, but you need to actually follow that example, and you need to stand up and do something, because you are the ones who can make the change. You are the ones who have the power to do that, because you have privilege as a white person that makes people listen to you more than they listen to us.
Yeah.
And this is, again, where I think language is really important. I've had discussions with different organizations about the word ally and allyship. And I have sort of like a love-hate relationship with these words, because language is very powerful. It shows everything that you mean, even if you don't mean it to. And when we say words like, oh, I'm an ally, we're making ourselves a noun. And to be quite honest, even me being Mexican and, having some experiences, I'm white passing. I'm from a point of privilege within my community. And so I will make mistakes often. The thing is, when we call ourselves an ally, what happens when we make a mistake? Does that mean we're not an ally? Does that mean, what does that mean we are? So taking it from a point of this is a noun to I am practicing allyship. These are the actions that I need to make it a very tangible, realistic thing. Again, I'm a teacher. I want things to be readily explained. This is how I practice allyship. And being very realistic with myself about what I can do, but also actually creating actions within my life, being intentional about it. Because sometimes I do not practice good allyship. That happens in my life, and I need to recognize that. Because if I just look at myself and say, oh, I'm a bad ally, then I don't really learn from that. That's like that knee-jerk defensive, like, oh, I'm bad, I don't want to be bad. No, I am not exercising the correct muscle that I need to be good at what I'm doing. And this is something that you need to practice. And at first, it's going to feel like you're checking boxes. I'm sorry, I don't mean to rant, but I've had this discussion with school districts, and they're like, oh, well, we're trying to be more diverse. It's like, that's fine, but like, what exact actions are you taking? And at first, it's going to feel like you're checking boxes, but then when it becomes an inherent part of your culture, we don't even care the boxes. That's a part of who we are in our mission. So again, I think everything that you guys said about language and allyship, and see, I just did it again. I'm trying to get rid of the word, hey, you guys. It's a very Midwestern way of saying things. It's ingrained in my brain. But every time I do it, I think of the students in my classroom and the LGBTQIA plus community. And that may be causing harm. So that in itself is a moment where I think, okay, that wasn't good allyship. What can I do for next time? And if I were to cause harm in some way, and if I do with this, I apologize and I need to do better. Just snap moment, let's keep doing this work. It's not about me.
And I think like that's actually critical. Like, no one's saying like if you mess up one time, like it's a scorecard, like you're booted. Like, clearly BIPOC in this community put up with a lot already. And they're still here, or some of them are still here. I think they're still gonna, that's a whole different conversation about like making amends to the folks who have been pushed out and like dealing with that. That's real. But I think like for the folks that are still here, it's like people are human, and they aren't going to be perfect. They were always learning. Like, if you're always learning about your newest lace pattern or hair thing, then we're still always learning about how to be better to each other. And I think that that's the minimum. It's this reaction that the minimum is too much for people who make this a hobby space or even a career space. I think either way, it still shows you have the skills to do better. You have the skills to like take a second to learn how to be a better community member. And like, to me, that's like the bottom line. It's just like, it's the minimum. Just care about other people, do that work, because no one's going to be like, ha, I caught you. Like, I don't know why people think it's that game. I think it's because when people are actively being harmful, we will call that out. And that's different from just messing up and saying, you know what, I use, you know, like you just said, like you use, hey guys, that's a thing. You're saying, hey, you know what, so sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Like, that's easy self-correction. It's the people who are willfully doing the harm and repeatedly doing the harm and actively defending the harm and doubling down when they are gently, when people gently say, hey, this really was hurtful to community members, this timing on this was really bad, like maybe you filmed this months ago, maybe you made this costume months ago, like we should talk about it. It's those reactions, and then the people who are like, how dare you come after them, and it's like, hey, this is harm being done. We're not asking, like, this is like, that's so different than the minimum of like, you notice you did something, like a behavior, and you're trying to correct and do better. Those are two different things.
Yeah. I use the standing on someone's foot analogy a lot. Like, say someone steps on my foot and I say, hey, you're standing on my foot. The normal, nice, polite, responsible response is, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And then they get off your foot, right? But apparently it's really hard to get off someone's foot when standing on someone's foot equals racism.
I think that people just want to do this mental gymnastics where it's like, if I keep doing this, then it was never bad, you know?
Yeah, so I actually was thinking about this because this has happened where people say, BIPOC, Black people, brown people say, hey, this thing that you or the community is doing is harmful. And a bunch of people come out of the woodwork and go, well, I don't feel safe saying what I think here anymore. What is it that you want to say?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you see someone say something and it gets called out as harmful, and your reaction is, well, now I can't talk, that deserves some examination.
No, for sure.
I mean, there was always a level of politeness before, and it kind of boggles my mind when people were so willing to accept those other norms, those polite norms that we kind of all as a society have already accepted, versus, when we're talking about race and gender and things like that. So, for example, and this was ingrained to me as a child, you never walk up to a female presenting person and say, are you pregnant? We never do that. You never do that. It has happened to me once in my life, and I just like stared at this person, and it was a terrible experience for me. But like, that is a societal norm that we've come to accept. So if that's something that we can practice, why can't we practice not using a person's dead name, or identifying them how they want to be identified, whatever that is? It's the mental gymnastics, like you were saying. Like, how come I can practice this? It says no shirt, no shoes, no service, but like, suddenly you throw something else in, and it shouldn't be that hard. You know what I mean? Polite.
I mean, masks. We don't have time to unpack all that, but
yeah. That's like a whole
other panel, Katie.
That's a whole other panel. I do though have like my gut in the Austin community specifically always is just like the cult of politeness has been used in like a way to like shut down certain conversations. So it's like definitely a level of like understanding what's actually going on, right? Like there's a surface level and then there's context, right? And I think like definitely for me in the Austin space, when people are like, you're being impolite because you said this meme was racist, and it's like, like that's a thing that I've seen used repeatedly to shut down conversations online, especially in that space, that kind of the Anglophile space that I think that kind of idealizes like what's proper and what's not. And I'm just like, no. Also, don't use the name Jane Austen in vain like that, because she was making jokes about someone dying because her husband was so ugly. Like, that woman said some shit. Like, do not act like she was proper. Her letters tell you otherwise. She talks about her hangovers. Like, no. Is she still part of, like, the white supremacist, like, colonial power problem? Yeah, but like, don't play this game of like trying to use politeness to shut people down when they're actually just doing the very like a nice, very gentle. Please stop being hateful. You know, like it's the minimum, fam.
Oh yeah,
Why is the meme considered impolite? Oh,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, why wasn't the meme considered impolite in the first place?
You know, it's things like that that I try not to let me keep up. You know, like I can't stay up all night. Yeah, because I'm just like I can't with like going. And then that's the other frustration too, right? It's like if someone is taking the time to explain to you that like it's uncomfortable, maybe try to do the rest of the work to understand why it made them uncomfortable if they didn't already provide you with that before you're like, it didn't make me uncomfortable, so you're wrong and you're making like please just do the minimum if you see these go down in like these forum spaces too, because I think that's the other thing. Like someone will say, like if there's, I've seen this happen in a lot of historical adjacent spaces where someone's doing very offensive appropriation and someone brings up, hey, I like this is uncomfortable, like it makes, this is why it's a problem, and other people just being like, well, I don't think it's a problem, so you're the problem. And it's just like, yo dog, like we can't play this game.
People people who think that the past and the fact that this is a history adjacent or historical oriented space means that it's somehow safer are incorrect. I know at least one person on this call has been threatened with physical violence. I have been verbally abused, doxxed, personally. It's currently not a safe space. Costuming and living history are not safe. So if you think that we're doing this panel because things are generally okay, but they could be better, you need to recalibrate your thinking. They are not safe. We are under threat.
And let me speak to that because I'm not sure if anyone else on this, but this was well over a year ago. I lose track of my years with COVID. But I remember that incident vividly because my fiance and I were moving to a different city. And I remember him looking at me and going, it's a good thing we're leaving, huh? We're changing our address. And there, I had a moment of clarity too from a friend of mine who is Black and who has existed in these spaces and educates in that. And she's like, oh, this is bad. You're seeing it now. And all these years, I was kind of playing pretty princess, and I'm in Civil War reenacting. That's my main space. That is very toxic. It's a very bad place right now. And it always has been, but she's like, oh, you're in it now. You're in. And I never thought of myself. I always thought, oh, I'm Mexican. I'm in this space somehow. And I just wasn't. So, you know, receiving those threats. And then the woman who sort of perpetuated that, you know, she is friends with a bunch of people. And I'm friends with those people. And I look at them and I'm like, you know what she did, right? And they're like, I don't want to cause any arguments. I want everything to be fine and safe. I'm like, so you just gave this white toxic woman a platform, this very racist, harmful woman a platform. You're advertising stuff in her shop. You are letting her speak by buying and supporting her. But that's okay, right? Because you're friends and you want to keep the peace. I am so over supporting things like that to the point where I don't even know how I can even exist in the reenacting community right now because of incidents like that. And yeah. I'm the young person. We're the people who are supposed to be, you know, picking up the torch once our older people are done and they retire. But why would I pick up a torch that's going to burn me?
We can't make it better if we're dead.
Yeah, and I also think like at that point too, it was never about sustainability. It was about maintaining certain people's power. So like in my experience, like that's just what I've seen, where people are trying to protect that with, well, like when your time comes. And it's like, I mean, I think ageism is another layer in here too, like in certain places where it's like, if your entire leadership space is like the same, I am very I'm very suspicious of it. And that's one of those things where it's like, if you're like, well, we, you know, the bylaws say, or the whatever say, then that's an opportunity for you to say, your bylaws might be problematic. They might be gatekeeping because, and if, you know, changing bylaws is going to be a whole process because you should make them more equitable. But like for leadership things, you should make it very clear, A, how people become leaders, and B, what is your mentorship program like if it is a hard thing to become like in that space? Because I think like for me too, in a lot of these areas, and again, it's not limited to one community, my God, but like, it's a very like, well, we sometimes have these very like, we vote on who's in leadership and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, cool. So how are you making that a more equitable, like, how do you make that a more inclusive table? And then like the whole thing about these terms is like, they're all building blocks and they all are tied to each other, which is, it's not just about letting them be on the table. It's, are you listening to them when they're there? Are you making spaces for those people in power when they're done? How do you mentor the next generation of people? Because like there are going to be people who are starting at a disadvantage in your spaces because they maybe didn't have the money to invest in this community as early, or whatever other etc. thing to get invested, because these are expensive hobbies, right? Like these are expensive spaces to be in. And like if you're undervaluing that and you're not understanding what they are going to bring, still, like, just because they haven't been in an org for 40 years doesn't mean they're not going to have something important to say. In fact, like they probably have some really cool, important stuff that's going to keep your org existing. But if you just have them there and you aren't listening to them and you're kind of ignoring the feedback they give, then you're kind of just saying, this is my nail in the coffin. I would also heavily suggest people who are in organizations that are like, I don't know how bad it could get. If you haven't followed the Romance Writers of America stuff, you really need to, because like actually everything pace by pace that's happened there, I have seen happen in these communities. On a different scale, but it's one of those things where I'm just like, it's literally an example, a living, breathing example of how you can literally tank your entire internationally known organization, like by just like protecting racists. And like I think that like that shouldn't be your goal, to be like, well, I want to keep my org up and running. Your goal should be protecting your members. But I also am very realistic that some people only operate thinking about money. And if, like, sadly, and I hate that, but it's also just like, if someone's giving you grief because you want to make change in an org for the better, bring them those numbers. Just show them that and be like, that's us in 3 months. Because sometimes you need to scare people to get them to care, and it sucks, but it's also like, hey, please like do the minimum. And if you stare in the eye of like this storm of a terrible situation and you still are not willing to make change, then if you are an ally doing this work, trying to make this change, and you see leadership being like, I don't care, so what if it happens? You need to leave. You need to let people know. You need to be loud about it. You need to tell them. And you need to let people also, like especially people of color, know that you made that effort, so they know that it's not a safe space for them. Because like the other part of all this too is the whisper network. And it's like, we have that because we need to know, like people of color need to tell each other, hey, this space is safe, these are some makers that are not okay. But like white people, you need to also step up and let us know if you know people have been problematic, because sometimes there's not somebody in all these spaces to tell us and give us the heads up. And like, yes, this is like a kind of shitty way to have to deal with things, but in traditionally like these spaces that don't have like a, you know, you could be in 3 Facebook groups and one of them has banned problematic people and one hasn't, and you might not know that history. And just like sharing that with like your friends, like letting them know ahead of time is really critical. Yes, we should be doing better to not have these people in these spaces at all, but like the real deal is like, if you have friends that you're bringing to an event and you know there are problematic people there, you're doing them a disservice. You should be really working to figure out ways to keep your friends safe, to keep your community members safe. And like part of that is really being active and understanding what is it leadership? Can you like help change leadership? Can you help change like down the structure? Can you just say, hey friend, I don't suggest being in that Facebook group because here's some stuff that went down. do that work. Please do that work. Save your friends.
Yeah.
I think narrative is just as important as leadership. You need to look at the distance event or if it's a site, what type of narratives do they have? Are they diverse narratives? Also, representation again, it comes back to representation and the complete integration of stories of BIPOC. If your event doesn't represent that, why would BIPOC want to join in the event or join in the space?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was question number 1. So
Y'all.
I'm feeling a 20-part series here.
Yeah. So we actually did talk about, I have 4 questions. Number 1 was intro. Number 2 was creating an inclusive space. And we've talked a lot about that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you could have one takeaway, I think we've got several. People can mix and match. You know, you do you, but take something away, please. And the last thing was, what do you want other BIPOC in the community that you're in who are interested in joining the community in some way or who are new to the community to know? What would you say to newbie you?
I think I would first start by saying that you can do this. You don't need to wait for others' permission to tell you that you can. For me, it was really important to start seeing and researching Chinese American or American Chinese history, because that's really what got me knowing that I can be in this space. So while I don't really connect with Chinese history, I connect with American Chinese history. That to me was so important. So I think for me, I would say that it's that you can do this. You don't have to wait for permission. And when you do this, there is a community of people who are wanting and willing to help you. So please reach out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think mine kind of goes along with that. And it is find your people.
Mhm.
You can start with one of us. I'm going to put everybody's handles and socials in the description of this panel. And if it turns out that, you know, whoever you reach out to isn't your cup of tea, that's okay. As we just discussed, BIPOC of various cultures are not a monolith.
Mhm.
But there's people out there for you. And you can find them. We're here. There's more of us. You belong. Find your people.
The algorithms might not paint that picture,
Yes.
but we are here.
Also, when you find them, like and save and comment and react to all of their posts so that the algorithm keeps showing you stuff that you want to see.
I think that, like, again, building on that, for me, what I would tell myself a couple of years ago when I first started getting into this is like, hey, of course, you don't need permission to do this. Also, there might not be a lot of people like you in this space. I don't know a whole lot of other Filipino history, like historical costumers. I didn't know about them until I met Bianca, and until Bianca introduced me to history bounding while BIPOC, and then I found my people there. So even if you reach out to somebody on this panel or not on this panel who isn't from where you are or who doesn't share those same roots as you, they might know people who are. So just just reach out, and we'll help you connect to what you need to connect to feel like you belong here, because you do. Another thing that I wanted to say is you do have a space. There are people here who will help you make that space, who will teach you how to take up space, because you deserve to take.
My big thing is, yes, reach out to me ever. Like, if you ever have questions, anything. Like, I am constantly annoyingly online, but because I work in social media, but that also means that I will run across stuff that I will save for folks that might need it, that may not apply to me, but I know they might need it, because like, as someone who's kind of like for a while, like the only very like visible person of color in a lot of Austin spaces. Like it's one of those things that you kind of develop when you're like, I'm okay being loud and that's fine. I'm okay being that person. Not everyone's okay doing that. But like for me, at least in that space, I've been like, I'm okay being like the kind of, you can come to me for stuff. If you're having issues with this other group, that I'm going to have a safe group for you. Like I'm going to be that person who's calling it out and enforcing it and giving you any links and resources you need, or even space to talk about something. Even when I am really tired, I will still respect your time and your energy because it's hard. And I know what it feels like. And I think that because of that, like, I definitely want to be there for folks. So I'd say, like, reach out to anybody here, but also if you're like, hey, maybe I don't have the same interest. Like, I don't care about Jane Austen, but do you know blank blank with this thing? And I'll be like, yeah, let me give you, like, I know some people here. Like, let me give you things. Because I think, like, for us, like, that's been the kind of way we get community, like, that we build community that's safe for us. So I say, like, definitely reach out. But also the thing that I would tell you if you were new to all this is just, like, don't measure yourself by other people's shit. Like, I think that was my biggest thing. It was like when I first started, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And like, I feel like I'm not as good as a bunch of people. And I feel like because of that, I didn't participate as early on as I could have. And I think like that's just like, don't measure yourself by other people's like dress forms and like what they're doing. Like measure by your own levels, and have fun with it. Because I think the other thing too is we're here because we're having fun, right? As much as like, I know that we're all just like, cringe, there's been some terrible things that happened. I think that we still find joy here. We still find community here. So if you aren't finding that, I think that there are ways that you could find it, but also examine who you're comparing yourself to if you're doing that, because it's not fun. Don't do that.
I want to kind of build on that a little bit from parts of what you're saying. If I have just like a piece of advice or something to say, it's most historical play or historic spaces that are centered around history are unsafe for BIPOC. I would, and I can't speak for every community, I can't speak for every single place that I'm not, but I have yet to walk into a space where it was safe for BIPOC. Now, are there some spaces that are more friendly? Are there some spaces where you're less likely to have a really terrible thing happen to you? Definitely. But there is not truly a safe space for BIPOC in historical communities. And I don't know if that's the same for costuming, but and the reasoning for that, I would say, is because a lot of the historic play and sort of the people who are really attracted to that, unfortunately, are very white-centered and based on sort of that idea of supremacy. Let me go back to the old days when, we had it good. That seems to be like a really big thing. So first of all, knowing going into it with your eyes wide open that there are going to be things that will probably happen that will make you uncomfortable, and be prepared in every single way, shape, and form that comes with. Because there are going to be a lot of well-intentioned white people who will tell you, oh yeah, come on in, we're safe. But they haven't done the training, they haven't done the work. They really don't understand what safe means. So go into it with your eyes open. And it really does help if you can find a space that has already been created by members of a community where there are people of color who are prominent, who are running that organization. Because as of right now, when I look at least I will say in Civil War reenacting, that does not exist unless you are in a very specific group. If you come to Michigan and you try to join any of the reenacting groups that you find, unless you're in, I can't remember what unit, the African American unit, I can't remember what it is. I can't remember the names. But if you join any other group, you run the risk of people saying inappropriate things to you and just things not going great. So if you can find somebody in your community, realize that they're there and they can help you. Like if you're ever at an event and you see me, like, I got your back. I'll throw down for you. I'm here. I'll do what's needed. But I can't protect you from everything. I can't give I can't, there's a lot of bad things that happen that even I'm not aware of. So me saying, yeah, come here, I'll make sure you're fine. I can't, and I should never say that, you know? So not to be negative, but a very realistic idea, and specifically Civil War reenacting is a very toxic place right now. Very toxic.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, not to be negative, but some people have never feared for their lives in a hobby space, and it shows. So this goes back to when we say that it's not safe, you have to believe us. You just have to believe us.
I guess if I were to talk to myself, you know, 2 years ago to a year ago, I would say be safe, but be stubborn, you know, because sometimes you do have to reapply and reapply and reapply. And, you know, it's an open secret. The only reason I got into costume a year ago was because I happened to apply on Courtney's day and she didn't throw my application out, you know? So it's worth it to keep digging, I guess is what I would say.
And then you met us.
And then I met you guys.
Yeah, no, Miah had to go through more than the usual level of BS in order to even access the community. So once again, believe us. Things happen. Things have happened. Things are happening. So yeah, this wasn't a super sunshine and roses panel, but that's not what it was here to be. We said what we said. The stuff that's happened has happened. And it's not our community to fix. So, all right, everybody. BIPOC friends, Black and brown people, amigos, amigas, amigues, be safe, reach out. We love you. We want you here and you belong. White friends, y'all got work to do. We're telling you what we need. We're here to help, but it's not our community to fix. It's not our wounds to heal. We need you. Not all heroes wear capes, but if you want one, you can probably make one yourself. So
Probably.
have at it. All right, guys. This has been.
Make sure it has pockets.
Yeah, make sure it has pockets. This has been the What Your BIPOC Costumer Friends Want You to Know panel. I think there's a lot of options for what you can take away. So check out the descriptions. I'm going to have everyone's socials down there, along with links to if they have a Patreon or a Ko-fi or anything like that. So check us all out. Have a good night. Well, it's night here. Have a good whatever period of time you happen to be inhabiting. Adios.